Alright, so now that we've had a chance to take a look at some of the basic tool palettes within ZBrush, let's now start to turn our attention to some of the actual tools and functionality that ZBrush has to offer. Alright, so in this lesson we're going to focus on the 2.5 dimensional painting technology that's built into ZBrush. Right, so this is one of those things that takes a little bit of getting used to. The fact that whenever we first open ZBrush, we're not actually working in any kind of a three-dimensional space, or not a truly three-dimensional space. What we're looking at right now is a flat 2.5 dimensional canvas, one that is, for the most part, flat, but does have the ability to contain some basic depth information. Right, so right now, as I mentioned, we're looking at just a flat canvas, basically exactly what we would see in something like Photoshop. So to illustrate this, what I'm going to do is switch to my paintbrush tool. Alright, and once you click on this little paintbrush icon, all these different tools that you see are relating to either the 2D or the 3D painting, and we'll have a chance to look into these in a little bit more depth. So for the time being, I'm just going to switch to my basic paintbrush tool, and you can see whenever I make a stroke, this is what we wind up with. Alright, now just a flat two-dimensional image. Again, this is just like what we would see in something like Photoshop. We're in a completely flat environment, but what ZBrush does that makes it unique from something like Photoshop is that we're not just painting on a two-dimensional canvas. This is actually a 2.5D canvas, and it doesn't use pixels as we typically know them. This uses something called pixels, which are actually able to contain depth information. So that's when you can see, as I make more strokes, we have the appearance of more depth. But again, just remember that we're not truly working in any kind of a 3D environment. This is still a flat image. So what we can start to do is add more of these different painterly type effects. So if I were to switch this to something like the smudge brush, you can see how we can start to grab certain areas and begin smudging these around, getting some really interesting looking effects. Again, in a two-dimensional environment. Right? We can also have the ability to take advantage of brushes that can introduce the appearance of depth into this 2D image. So for example, if we were to switch to something like the snake hook brush, you can see as I start to grab certain areas and pull these, it's able to more or less add the appearance of these protrusions and spikes and things like that. But again, we're still working in a 2D image. This has no three-dimensional imagery to it, or any three-dimensional geometry. But with these pixels that ZBrush is able to paint with, we can really start to get some very, very interesting types of effects. So for example, if I were to switch this brush to a different color, let's say something more along the lines of green, and switch this to, let's say maybe the fiber brush, we can start to paint in things that have the appearance of either a moss or things like hair, for example. So right now I'm actually using a Wacom digital tablet, so this is probably a definite necessity if you're going to really try to start to use ZBrush, because these tablets actually have the ability to be pressure sensitive. So the harder I make a pressure, so you can see right now this is pretty light, you can say as I start to push harder, we start to get more of an effect of whatever I happen to be painting on. So keyboard shortcuts work pretty much the same way. Control-Z will let us undo. We have the ability to keep track of how many undos we have left. If we go up to the Edit menu, you can see I have 53 undo operations left, and I can redo up to 11. Right, so some really, really neat effects that we can start to gain with some of this 2.5D pixel painting technology that we have access to here within ZBrush. Alright, so what we'll start to do in the next lesson, now that we've had a chance to see kind of this basic two-dimensional canvas that we're working on, let's start to now introduce the aspect of working with true 3D geometry here within ZBrush.